The first gunshot rang out just as Abigail Thornton stepped off the westbound train into the dust of Redemption Creek, a town as harsh as its name was hopeful. The year was 1876, and like America itself, Abigail was starting over with nothing but determination and the clothes on her back. People scattered as more shots echoed down the main street. Abigail pressed herself against the station wall, heart hammering against her ribs. She'd left Boston to escape violence, not walk straight into it. "Madam, you might want to find some better cover," a deep voice said beside her. Abigail turned to find herself staring into the most striking blue eyes she'd ever seen, set in a sun-weathered face beneath a worn Stetson. The man stood tall and confident despite the chaos, a star pinned to his vest identifying him as the local law. "I just arrived," she stammered, clutching her carpet bag tighter. "I don't know where to go." "Name's Yates Nash, County Sheriff," he said, tipping his hat. "And you've picked a mighty interesting time to visit Redemption Creek, Mississippi." "Thornton. Abigail Thornton." She flinched as another shot rang out, followed by the sound of breaking glass. "Is it always like this?" Sheriff Nash shook his head, his expression hardening. "Mason brothers are at it again. Been feuding with the saloon owner for months." He glanced at her properly then, noting her fine dress now coated with travel dust, the determined set of her jaw despite the fear in her eyes. "Where you heading?" "Got family here." "No family," Abigail said. "I've come for the teaching position." Understanding dawned on the sheriff's face. "You're the new schoolteacher from back east." He looked like he wanted to say more, but was interrupted by another volley of gunfire. "Listen, I've got to deal with this. The boarding house is just down the way, run by Widow Jenkins. Tell her Yates sent you." Before she could thank him, he was gone, striding purposefully toward the commotion, hand resting on the revolver at his hip. Abigail watched him go, struck by the contrast between the violence of the frontier and the unexpected kindness of a stranger. The boarding house was a modest two-story structure with a freshly painted white picket fence that seemed almost defiantly proper amid the dusty, untamed surroundings. Widow Jenkins, a formidable woman with silver-streaked hair and eyes that missed nothing, welcomed Abigail with a practiced efficiency that suggested she'd seen countless souls pass through her doors. "Another city girl," she remarked, looking Abigail up and down. "Last teacher didn't make it through winter. Said the cold was in her bones and the loneliness in her heart." "I'm made of sturdier stuff," Abigail replied, summoning confidence she didn't entirely feel. The widow's expression softened slightly. "You'll need to be. Teaching's hard enough back east with proper classrooms and supplies. Out here, you'll be lucky to have books, let alone children who can attend regular like when there's crops to tend and cattle to drive." As she unpacked her meager belongings in the small but clean room, Abigail wondered if she'd made a terrible mistake. Boston had become unbearable after the scandal, but at least it had been familiar. Here, with the lingering sound of gunshots still echoing in her mind, everything felt dangerous and unknown. The next morning, Sheriff Nash appeared at the boarding house just as Abigail was finishing breakfast. He stood in the doorway, hat in hand, looking oddly formal compared to their chaotic first meeting. "Miss Thornton, I wanted to apologize for yesterday's welcome," he said. "Thought I might show you to the schoolhouse, help you get settled." The schoolhouse, when they reached it, was little more than a cabin with rough-hewn benches and a blackboard that had seen better days. A pot-bellied stove stood cold in the corner, and the windows were coated with a fine layer of dust that filtered the morning sunlight. "It's not much," Yates admitted, watching her face carefully for disappointment. Abigail ran her fingers along a desk, leaving tracks in the dust. "It's more than some have," she said softly, remembering the tenements of Boston where children had nothing at all. "Town council scraped together enough for basic supplies," he continued, nodding toward a cabinet. "Term starts next Monday. You'll have about 15 students, ages 6 to 16, if everyone shows up." "And will they?" "Show up, I mean." Yates leaned against the doorframe, considering. "Depends on their folks, the weather, the cattle. Life out here doesn't much care for schedules, Miss Thornton." "Please, call me Abigail," she said, suddenly weary of formalities. "If I'm to survive here, I suspect we should dispense with unnecessary politeness." A smile touched his lips, transforming his serious face. "Fair enough, Abigail. Though I should warn you, Folks around here might take a while to warm up to you. They've seen teachers come and go. Then I'll simply have to stay long enough to prove them wrong." The days before school began passed in a whirlwind of preparation. Abigail scrubbed the schoolhouse until her hands were raw, arranged what few books were available, and crafted lesson plans that could accommodate the varied ages and abilities of her future students. She saw Yates occasionally, usually on his rounds through town. He'd tip his hat, ask how preparations were coming, and sometimes bring news or supplies he thought might help. There was something reassuring about his presence, steady and unwavering amid the strangeness of her new life. The morning school was to begin. Abigail rose before dawn, too nervous to sleep. She dressed carefully in her best teaching dress, pinned her hair precisely, and walked to the schoolhouse as the sun crested the distant mountains. To her surprise, a small figure was already waiting on the steps. "You the new teacher?" asked a girl of about 13, her calico dress patched but clean, her dark blonde hair braided tightly. "I am. Abigail Thornton." The girl nodded, appraising her frankly. "I'm Sarah Collins. Pa said I could come long as my chores get done. I want to learn figures proper." "Well, Sarah Collins, you're my first student and therefore especially welcome," Abigail said, unlocking the door. "Would you like to help me prepare for the others?" By 9 o'clock, 12 children had arrived, a motley assortment of ages and backgrounds that reflected the diverse fabric of the frontier. Some came on horseback from distant ranches, others walked from town, and one boy arrived in a wagon driven by a ranch hand who eyed Abigail suspiciously before departing. She had just begun taking attendance when the door opened once more. Yates stood there with a small boy who couldn't have been more than 6, looking terrified. "Found this young fellow wandering near the creek," Yates explained. "Says his ma told him school was starting today." The boy Daniel Fisher, as Abigail soon learned, was placed with the younger children, and Yates lingered for a moment, watching as she brought order to the room with a gentle but firm hand. "You're a natural," he said quietly as he prepared to leave. "We'll see if you still think so after a week," she replied with a smile. But after a week, and then a month, Abigail found herself not just surviving but flourishing. The children, initially wary, responded to her genuine interest in their lives and her creative approaches to learning. She organized nature studies by the creek, taught mathematics through practical problems about cattle and crops, and held reading circles that soon had even the most reluctant students engaged. The town, too, began to accept her. Mrs. Jenkins introduced her to the ladies' sewing circle, where Abigail's Boston education was less important than her willingness to help piece quilts for new babies and families in need. The general store owner, Mr. Harrington, started ordering books she requested, and even the gruff bartender at the Silver Dollar Saloon nodded respectfully when she passed. Only one cloud shadowed her growing contentment. Rumors had begun circulating about her past. Whispers followed her, occasionally speculation about why a well-bred Eastern woman would choose such a remote post. Most were harmless imaginings, but Abigail knew the truth would be far more damaging if discovered. On a crisp Saturday in October, Abigail was returning from a walk when she spotted a familiar figure outside the boarding house. Yates was deep in conversation with a man she didn't recognize, but what struck her was the sheriff's expression, grave and troubled in a way she hadn't seen before. "Everything all right, Sheriff?" she called as she approached. Both men turned. The stranger, expensively dressed with a gold watch chain visible across his vest, studied her with undisguised interest. "Miss Thornton," Yates said, his voice oddly formal. "This is Mr. Edwin Palmer, recently arrived from Boston. Says he's looking for information about new settlers to the territory." Boston. The name sent a chill through her that had nothing to do with the autumn air. Abigail forced a polite smile. "How interesting. What brings you all the way to Redemption Creek, Mr. Palmer?" "Business opportunities," Palmer replied smoothly, but his eyes were calculating. "Though I confess, the West has brought more surprises than I anticipated. Finding a Boston acquaintance, for instance, was unexpected." "I'm afraid you're mistaken," Abigail said, her heart racing. "I've never had the pleasure." "No." Palmer's smile didn't reach his eyes. "My mistake, then. Though you bear a striking resemblance to someone involved in a rather notorious scandal. A woman who disappeared quite suddenly after her father's financial collapse." Yates watched this exchange with growing suspicion. Mr. Palmer was just leaving, he said firmly. Weren't you, sir? After Palmer reluctantly departed, Yates turned to Abigail. Want to tell me what that was about? Nothing of consequence, she said, avoiding his gaze. Didn't look like nothing. His voice softened. Abigail, if you're in some kind of trouble, I'm not, she insisted. At least, not anymore. Please, Yates, let it be. He studied her face for a long moment before nodding slowly. All right, but if that fella gives you any trouble, you come find me. Palmer didn't approach Abigail directly in the days that followed, but she felt his presence like a shadow. He'd taken a room at the hotel, allegedly conducting business with local ranchers, but she often spotted him watching her from a distance. Worse, she noticed people looking at her differently, conversations stopping when she entered shops. The truth caught up with her on a Wednesday afternoon as school dismissed. Abigail was erasing the blackboard when she heard the door open and close. We're finished for today, she said without turning. Classes resume tomorrow at hello, Abigail. She whirled to find Palmer standing just inside the door, twirling his hat in his hands. You need to leave, she said, gripping the chalk so tightly it snapped in her fingers. Not before we have a little chat. He smiled unpleasantly. I've been making inquiries. Imagine my surprise when I confirmed that the respectable schoolteacher of Redemption Creek is none other than Abigail Thornton, daughter of Jonathan Thornton, the man who defrauded half of Boston society through his investment scheme. Abigail's stomach twisted. My father's crimes were his own. Perhaps. But you were engaged to my cousin, Charles Palmer, until the scandal broke. Then you vanished in the night, along with several valuable family heirlooms that my aunt insists were only on loan to you. That's a lie, Abigail said, color rising in her cheeks. I returned everything that belonged to the Palmers. The only thing I kept was what was rightfully mine, my mother's jewelry, which your aunt tried to claim was collateral for my father's debts. Palmer stepped closer. Return the jewelry, and I might be persuaded to leave without sharing what I know about your family's disgrace. I sold those pieces to pay for my journey west, she said, lifting her chin defiantly. There's nothing to return. His face darkened. Then perhaps the good people of Redemption Creek would be interested to learn they've entrusted their children to the daughter of the most notorious swindler in Massachusetts. Is that so? Both turned to find Yates standing in the doorway, his expression dangerously calm. Sheriff, this is a private matter, Palmer began. Not in my town, it isn't, Yates replied, stepping inside. Especially not when it involves threatening our schoolteacher. I wasn't threatening, merely stating facts, Palmer protested. This woman is hiding her true identity. Her father, I don't much care who her father was, Yates interrupted. Miss Thornton has done nothing but good since arriving here. Now, I suggest you conclude whatever business brought you to Redemption Creek and move along. Palmer's face flushed with anger. You can't order me to leave town. No, but I can make staying mighty uncomfortable, Yates said mildly, though there was steel beneath the words. Your choice, Mr. Palmer. After a tense moment, Palmer jammed his hat back on his head. This isn't over, he said to Abigail before stalking out. When he was gone, Abigail sank onto the nearest bench, trembling. Thank you, she whispered. Yates sat beside her. Want to tell me the truth now? Slowly, haltingly she did. She told him about her father's investment scheme that had collapsed, leaving dozens of Boston's elite financially ruined. How she'd known nothing of his fraudulent activities until federal agents arrested him at their family home. How her fiancé had abandoned her, society had shunned her, and she'd fled west with only what she could carry, determined to build a new life where no one knew the Thornton name. I didn't lie about my qualifications, she finished. I truly was a teacher in Boston. But I understand if the town wants someone untainted, teaching their children. Yates was quiet for so long that Abigail prepared herself for judgment. When he finally spoke, his voice was gentle. My father was a drunk who gambled away our family farm when I was 12, he said. That's why I understand something important. We aren't our parents, Abigail. We make our own way. Tears stung her eyes. Some might not see it that way. Then they're fools, he said simply. You've earned your place here through your own merit. Over the next few days, Abigail waited for the whispers to grow into open condemnation, but to her surprise, life continued much as before. If Palmer was spreading rumors, they weren't gaining much traction. Yates made a point of being visible around town, often stopping by the schoolhouse or walking her home, his presence a silent statement of support. On Saturday, he appeared at the boarding house with his wagon. "Thought you might like to see a bit more of the territory," he said. "There's a spot up in the hills that shows the whole valley. Pretty this time of year with the leaves turning." The day was perfect, clear and crisp, with aspen trees glowing gold against the dark pines. They followed a narrow trail up into the foothills, eventually reaching a rocky outcrop that overlooked the sprawling landscape below. Redemption Creek looked tiny from this height, a cluster of buildings nestled between the winding creek and the vast open range. "It's beautiful," Abigail breathed, taking in the panorama. "This is why I stay," Yates said, standing beside her. "Came west after the war, looking for something. I don't know, cleaner maybe. Found this place and knew I was home." They shared a simple picnic of bread, cheese, and apples, talking easily about books they'd read, places they'd seen, and the quirks of Redemption Creek's residents. For the first time in months, Abigail felt truly relaxed, the weight of her secrets temporarily lifted. As they packed up to leave, Yates hesitated. "There's something you should know," he said. "Palmer left town yesterday, but before he did, he made some noise at the saloon about your past." Abigail's happiness evaporated. And old Jim Harris, you know, runs the livery stable." He stood right up and said, "That gal's teaching my grandson to read when nobody else could get through to him. Don't care if her pa was the devil himself." Others backed him up. "Truly?" Abigail asked, hardly daring to believe it. Yates nodded. "This town judges folks on what they do, not where they came from. You've earned their respect, Abigail." The first snow fell in November, transforming Redemption Creek into a glistening wonderland that delighted the children but complicated daily life. Abigail adapted, learning to bank the schoolhouse stove to keep it burning overnight, and organizing older students to help younger ones make the journey safely. As Thanksgiving approached, the town prepared for its annual celebration, a community dinner held in the church that brought together people from miles around. Abigail found herself on the decorating committee, working alongside the minister's wife to transform the simple space with pine boughs and candles. "Sheriff Nash has been mighty attentive to you," Mrs. Peterson remarked as they worked. "Haven't seen him take an interest in anyone since he came to town 5 years back." Abigail felt her cheeks warm. "We're friends," she said carefully, though she couldn't deny that her feelings for Yates had grown more complex over the passing weeks. Mrs. Peterson hummed knowingly. "Well, friendship's a fine foundation." The dinner itself was a boisterous affair, with tables groaning under the weight of roasted turkeys, hams, pies, and all manner of side dishes contributed by families eager to showcase their specialties. Abigail found herself seated between Mrs. Jenkins and Yates, enjoying the warmth of community that had been absent from her life in Boston even before the scandal. As the evening progressed, and children ran playing between tables, Yates leaned closer. "Would you walk with me a spell? Getting a mite warm in here." Outside, the night was crisp and clear, stars blazing overhead in a way they never did in city skies. They walked silently for a time, their breath forming clouds in the cold air. "I've been thinking," Yates said finally, stopping beneath the bare branches of an oak tree. "About Palmer and what he said." Abigail tensed. "What about it?" "Not about your past," he clarified quickly. "About your jewelry, your mother's pieces that you sold." "Oh." She relaxed slightly. "What about them?" "It bothers me that you had to part with something so meaningful," he said, "especially since it was rightfully yours." "It was necessary," Abigail said simply. "I needed a fresh start more than I needed keepsakes." Yates looked troubled. "Still, family heirlooms shouldn't be sacrificed lightly." "What's done is done," she said, wondering at his concern over something she'd long ago made peace with. "Besides, I have memories of my mother that no one can take away." He nodded, seeming distracted. "We should get back before they send a search party." In the weeks that followed, Abigail noticed a subtle change in Yates. He still stopped by the schoolhouse, still walked her home on occasion, but there was a new reserve to him, as if he were holding something back. She told herself not to read too much into it. The approach of winter brought additional responsibilities for the sheriff, and she was busy with school preparations for the Christmas program. Then one bitterly cold evening in mid-December, a blizzard descended on Redemption Creek with startling ferocity. Abigail had stayed late at the schoolhouse, preparing decorations with several students who'd volunteered to help. By the time they finished, snow was falling so heavily that visibility was reduced to mere feet. "You children will stay here tonight," she decided, surveying the whiteout conditions with concern. "It's not safe to venture out." She stoked the stove, organized a simple meal from supplies kept for school lunches, and was arranging blankets when the door burst open, bringing with it a swirl of snow and a snow-covered figure. "Yates!" Abigail exclaimed as he stamped snow from his boots. "Thought I might find you all here," he said, unwinding a scarf from his face. "Town's organizing emergency accommodations. Mr. Harrington sent supplies." He nodded to the pack he'd dropped by the door. With his help, they transformed the schoolhouse into a makeshift shelter, pushing desks aside to create sleeping areas and distributing the food and additional blankets he'd brought. As the evening wore on, other stranded townspeople made their way to them, until the schoolhouse held nearly 20 souls, all grateful for warmth and company amid the storm. Abigail moved among them, offering comfort and organizing resources, while Yates maintained a watchful eye on the stove and the worsening conditions outside. It was past midnight before the last child fell asleep, leaving the adults to speak in hushed tones. "You're good in a crisis," Yates observed as Abigail settled beside him on a bench near the stove. "Calm, practical. Necessity teaches quickly," she replied, accepting the cup of coffee he offered. "Though I hope these children have some pleasant memories of this night, not just fear." "They will," he assured her. "Years from now, they'll tell stories about the great blizzard of '76 and how they camped in the schoolhouse with Miss Thornton." She smiled at the thought, suddenly aware of how close they were sitting, how the firelight caught the angles of his face. "What about you, Sheriff? What stories will you tell?" His expression grew serious. "I'll remember sitting here with the bravest woman I know, thinking about how differently my life might have turned out if you hadn't stepped off that train." Abigail's breath caught. "Yates, been wanting to say something for a while now," he continued, his voice low. "Just haven't found the right words." Before he could continue, there was a cry from one of the younger children, waking from a nightmare. Abigail rose immediately to comfort the child, and the moment between them passed. The blizzard raged for 2 days before finally abating enough for people to return to their homes. In its wake came the crisp, brilliant days of deep winter, with the town transformed into a glistening wonderland of snow and ice. Despite the harsh conditions, preparations for Christmas continued, with the schoolhouse serving as the center of community activities. Abigail threw herself into the holiday planning, partly from genuine enthusiasm and partly to distract herself from thoughts of Yates and what he might have been about to say that night. They'd had little opportunity for private conversation since, with both of them busy helping the town recover from the storm's effects. On the evening of the Christmas program, the schoolhouse was transformed with evergreen boughs, red ribbons, and dozens of candles. Parents and townspeople packed the room, perching on desks and standing along walls to watch the children perform recitations, songs, and a short nativity play that Abigail had written. The performance was a resounding success, with even the most taciturn ranchers smiling at the children's earnest efforts. As the formal program concluded and people mingled, enjoying cider and cookies, Abigail found herself surrounded by parents offering thanks and congratulations. "Miss Thornton," a voice called above the chatter. Yates stood near the door, motioning for her to join him. "Is something wrong?" she asked as she approached, noting his serious expression. "Not here," he said. "Can you step outside for a moment?" Puzzled, she followed him into the still evening. The night was cold but beautiful, with stars scattered across the black velvet sky and the snow glowing blue in the moonlight. "What is it?" she asked when they were a little distance from the schoolhouse. Without answering, Yates reached into his pocket and withdrew a small package wrapped in plain brown paper. "This is for you," he said, holding it out. "An early Christmas gift." Abigail accepted it with surprise. "You didn't need to open it," he urged gently. She unwrapped the package carefully to reveal a small wooden box. Inside, nestled on a bed of cotton, lay a delicate gold locket on a fine chain almost identical to one she had described selling months ago. "Yates," she breathed, lifting it with trembling fingers. "How did you?" "It's not the same one," he admitted. But I had the jeweler in Carson City make it based on your description. Open it. Inside the locket was a tiny portrait not of her mother as the original had contained, but a miniature painting of the view from the hillside where they'd picnicked, Redemption Creek visible in the distance. I thought, Yates said hesitantly, that you might want something to remember your new home by, alongside memories of your old one. Tears welled in Abigail's eyes. It's perfect, she whispered. But I don't understand why. Because I love you, he said simply. Have since about the second week you were here, when I saw you teaching little Daniel Fisher to write his name, and you had more patience than any human I've ever met. Abigail stared at him, her heart pounding. Yates, you don't have to say anything, he hurried on. I know I'm just a small-town sheriff with nothing much to offer a woman like you. I have nothing to offer you, she interrupted, voice cracking. My family name is ruined, my reputation tarnished by association. I came west with nothing but the clothes on my back and a desperate hope for a fresh start. Yates reached out, taking her gloved hands in his. Then offer me your heart, he said softly. That's all I've ever wanted. In answer, Abigail stood on tiptoe and kissed him, feeling his arms come around her as naturally as if they'd been meant to hold her all along. When they finally broke apart, she was laughing and crying at once. Is that a yes? He asked, his own eyes suspiciously bright. Yes, she said. 1,000 times yes. They were married in the spring, when wildflowers carpeted the hills and the creek ran high with snowmelt. The entire town turned out for the celebration, with children from the school forming an honor guard that showered them with flower petals as they emerged from the church. Years later, when Abigail Nash, no longer Miss Thornton, looked back on that first winter in Redemption Creek, she marveled at how a journey begun in desperation had led her to such happiness. The schoolhouse had expanded to a proper building, and she now taught alongside another teacher as the town had grown. Yates still served as sheriff, though there was talk of him running for mayor when old Mayor Thompson finally retired. And on quiet evenings, when their 2 children were asleep and the house was still, Abigail would sometimes open the locket she always wore and show Yates the new edition, a tiny portrait of their family that had been painted on their first anniversary, nestled beside the view of Redemption Creek. Best bargain I ever made, he would say, pulling her close. Trading my heart for yours. And to think, she'd reply with a smile, I once believed I had nothing to offer. In the wild landscape of the West, where fortunes were won and lost on the turn of a card or the strike of a pick, Abigail and Yates had discovered the richest claim of all, a love built not on what they possessed, but on who they had become together. And that, both agreed, was worth more than all the gold in the Colorado hills.